Today, we're going to a desolate cave, to a single terrifying moment that didn't just change one man's life, it ignited a force that would completely reshape the course of human history.
So, to really get what's going on here, you've got to picture 7th century Arabia. It's a world of bustling trade routes, fierce tribal loyalties, and a spiritual life that revolves around idols. As this quote hints, it was a world just waiting for something. It was teetering on the edge of a monumental transformation.
But what's so interesting is that this world-changing event doesn't kick off with some grand command from the heavens. Nope, it starts much more quietly, with one man's personal search for truth, a deep, personal quest for something more than what his world was offering.
Right in the middle of this vibrant and, let's be honest, often chaotic city lived Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Now, everyone knew him as a respected merchant, a man of integrity, but on the inside, he was really troubled by the spiritual emptiness he saw all around him, a state that later gets called Jahiliyyah, or a time of ignorance. Something just didn't sit right with him. So to find some clarity, to get away from it all, he'd often make this pretty tough 3-mile journey out of the city to a rugged mountain called Jabal al-Nur. And as you can see, it's a serious climb, 642 meters tall. Near the top, he found this small, quiet cave. It was the perfect retreat, a place where he would just meditate for days, sometimes even weeks at a time. And you know, this time in the cave, looking out at the universe, it was way more than just a personal break. It was like the final divine preparation for an encounter that was about to break a 600-year prophetic silence, a silence that had held since the time of Jesus.
And this is where everything comes to a head. The year is 610 CE. It's the month of Ramadan, a time for fasting and deep spiritual reflection. And on one of these nights, in the absolute silence of that cave, the heavens finally meet the earth.
Now, this was not some gentle vision. This was a terrifying, overwhelming reality. And out of this immense presence, this being, which was the angel Jibril, came one single powerful command. The command was Iqra, which means read. It's so simple, right? But for Muhammad, it was impossible. He couldn't read or write. So in his terror, he could only reply with the honest truth. And the angel's response? It wasn't more words. He was seized, grabbed in this powerful, crushing embrace that pressed him so hard, he thought he just couldn't bear it. Then, just as suddenly, he was released. And the angel repeated the exact same command, read. So as you can see here, this intense, terrifying back and forth happened 3 times. Each time this same command, each time the same reply that he couldn't read, and each time the embrace got more and more powerful. This was a physical, spiritual ordeal, and it was designed to impress upon him that this was absolutely real. He wasn't dreaming, this was happening. And finally, after that 3rd embrace, his terrified question of, "What am I supposed to read?" was answered. The angel began to recite, and these words, the very first verses of what would become the Quran, just flowed from Muhammad's lips. This was the start, the very beginning of a divine message that would continue to unfold over the next 23 years. Okay, let's stop for a second and think about the absolute bombshell of that very first command. The first word of this new revelation wasn't fight, it wasn't pray, it wasn't even believe. It was read. I mean, just think about how revolutionary that is. You're in a culture that prizes oral tradition, right? Where all the history, all the wisdom, it's all passed down through spoken word, through memorization. And the very first command of this new path is about engaging with a written text. It was a command to seek knowledge. And you can really see here the massive shift that was taking place. The entire foundation of faith was moving away from just ancestral traditions passed down by word of mouth to a direct connection with divine knowledge, something that would be preserved and passed on through a written text symbolized by the pen. And here's a pretty fascinating detail for you. The chapter in the Quran that begins with these verses, called Surah Al-Alaq, was actually completed years later. So those first 5 verses came in the total solitude of the cave, but the rest of it, that was revealed later, right in the public square of Mecca, dealing head-on with the very first challenges this new message was facing. But okay, before this message could go out and challenge the world, the man who received it had to deal with his own pure terror. So let's look at how this intensely personal, terrifying experience started its journey to becoming a global message. This part of the story is so critical. His reaction isn't arrogance or ambition. It is pure human fear.
He runs down that mountain, his heart just pounding, and he cries out to his wife, "Cover me, cover me." This wasn't a man looking for power. This was a man who was completely and totally overwhelmed by a divine encounter.
And this is where his wife, Khadijah, plays such a crucial role. She doesn't dismiss his terror. She immediately comforts him, and she grounds this unbelievable, supernatural event in his known reality. She basically reminded him of who he was, his kindness, his honesty, his care for others. And she reassured him that the God who made him that way would never, ever bring him harm.
And she was right. As you can see from this timeline, that one single harrowing night in the cave was just the spark. It ignited a prophetic mission that would stretch over the next 23 years, a journey that would build a community, establish a whole new way of life, and ultimately reshape society from the ground up. So it all comes back to this one pretty mind-blowing question. How could a single command, to read, given to one terrified, unlettered man in a desolate cave, become the catalyst for spiritual and intellectual revolution that continues to influence the lives of billions to this very day?